beautiful Northern California, San Francisco, how you rolled out the red carpet for us today, weather, and I understand it might even approach 80 in some areas of the city, so this will make San Franciscans crazy, but we Southern Californians are used to that, so. I'm Lucy Dunn. I'm not sure if it was a punishment or for good deeds. I was appointed as chair as Mr. Medaffer stepped off after incredibly productive years of service, so thank you very much for that. Most of you know me from certainly my work as CEO of the Orange County Business Council in Orange County, but also I've been on the commission since Governor Schwarzenegger's days, the California Transportation Commission, and I've had a great deal of pleasure and satisfaction with some great work that all of you have done, certainly in your areas, and certainly working with our state. So I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much for that. So this is the first of 3 meetings scheduled for this year, and I thought what I would do is go over on the items on the agenda first, have you take little notes and give me some comments on it if you would. First, on our TAC membership, and as I mentioned, although Mr. Medaffer is no longer serving as chair, he will continue as a member. We're thrilled for that. His knowledge is astounding, and the continuity is fantastic. Well, okay, I will bet on that. And secondly, I want to also thank Pam O'Connor for staying on board. Again, the continuity of this group and their knowledge is fantastic, and so thank you, Pam, for staying on and now being a public member. Your service is very much appreciated on behalf of all of us. So the last TAC meeting was held last November in Sacramento. A lot in the transportation arena has occurred. I know you will celebrate with me on the defeat of Prop 6, so we have funding in the system still. Thank you, our state legislature. Thank you, our governor, for our gas taxes. But interestingly, it is so fascinating to watch now gas taxes skyrocket through the roof. And even at our last CTC meeting, I made a point about saying that doesn't necessarily mean more money in the coffers, right? So it is interesting. It makes our work even more relevant, I think, than ever before. So thank you for that, and for your support on that. Questions and comments from the public are always welcome, and one of the main purposes of our meetings is to gather public comment on our issues, and so if there's anyone that is here and would like to speak, to fill out a speaker card, and we would love to take you. Where is Jennifer? Jennifer's right there. Jennifer is the holder of the speaker's card, so that's great. And then a final note, our meeting is being webcast, so, be on your best behavior, put your lipstick on, and know that we've got a good audience out there that will also thrive with the information we share. Also, just a little note too, in an emergency, you can see the emergency exits, go straight out the street, same way you came back. There's no other exit from this room that I'm aware of, so just be aware of your surroundings. I say that only because 2 buildings down, there was a fire sound going off as I was walking in, and I thought, I should probably give the emergency admonition. So, all right, with that, Jennifer, can you please call the roll?
Chair Dunn.
Present.
Steve Finnegan.
Here.
Assembly Member Chu. Eric Sauer.
Present.
Senator Jim Bell. Jim Medaffer.
Present.
Lee Tien. Lisa Bartlett.
Here.
Lauren Kay.
Here.
Martin Wax.
Here.
Pam O'Connor.
Here.
Richard Marcantonio.
Present.
Robert Poitras.
Yes.
Susan Ornelas.
Here.
And Terry Benzel.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here. And then do we have any public comment at this time? No comments? Great. All right. So having gone over the preliminaries, we're going to now take a look at the minutes. And for those that were here at the last meeting, if there are any edits or comments.
I'll move approval.
Very good. Motion. Motion by Mr. Finnegan, second by Lisa Bartlett. Any opposition? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any Abstentions? That would be probably me. Except for that, very good, minutes approved. Next item is, Garth, did you want to provide an update on the action items from the November minutes?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Just a real quick update. Staff just wanted to provide what happened in terms of the action items that were identified back in November at the last TAC meeting. Staff has sent links to the TAC members of the transportation funding studies that were discussed back in November that were prepared by the Minetta Transportation Institute and then also the UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies. That's the study that Alan Jen was working on that the TAC was briefed on in prior TAC meetings. Another action item for the commission, another action item was for both the commission and the Caltrans staff to discuss the role of the TAC in upcoming Caltrans-led road chart studies. And I know this is an item that's going to be discussed in a little bit more detail later on. And commission staff has been meeting periodically with Caltrans road chart staff. Also, it was brought up that we should consider holding a joint road charts TAC meeting along with the California Transportation Commission meeting. And I know, I think unfortunately this calendar year, the agenda is fairly full for the CTC, but that's something that perhaps could be considered for next calendar year. The last action item was to make sure that Alan Jen, who mentioned, from UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies, have him come and give us future updates to the TAC members on some of the research work that UC ITS is working on UC Davis, and that's something that we could schedule at future TAC meetings. And with that, that completes my report.
Very good. Any questions for Garth on that? That's consensus on those who were at the November meeting. Thank you very much. Okay, we're now moving. Oh,
No,
yes, I'm
I
sorry.
was confused whether I should be red or green. I'm red, right?
You're red.
Good.
Okay, I'm red.
No, I was not trying to interrupt. Confused for a moment.
That's great. Okay, well, when your light is on, it means your mic is on. So if you want to hit the button to turn it off, that way, when it's on, I'll know you want to speak. How's that? Okay, great. Okay, good. All right, let's see. On agenda, we're rocking and rolling here. First of all, then, member reports. Any TAC members have any items that they wish to report on related to road charge? Oh, it's going to be a great, fast meeting. I can just tell. Nothing, not even Medaffer? Holy moly, yes.
And this is often a talkative group.
I know.
Lucy, so-
I'm scaring them, I can tell. Please do not be afraid. You're just warming up. Thank you, thank you. There, good, I've got to take her.
Madam Chair, never a recovering politician doesn't know how to stay away from a microphone. I really think that as I look at the agenda today and look at our calendar for this year, and again, thanking our staff at the CTC for the work that they've done, the work going forward now is based on new legislation that Governor Brown signed into law last year. But I think what it really says is that this TAC is going to be looked at along with the commission, and I know we're hearing from Caltrans later in the meeting, as really go-to when it comes to what are we going to do as the gasoline tax continues to drop in terms of revenues to the state. And this is not just California's problem, this is the whole country. And yeah, granted, gas prices, I guess, I don't buy gas, but I understand it's up quite a bit. I always have to get that dig in for the people.
No, Mary, you're going to get a bigger bill.
Yeah, I know. Lucy and I have had an ongoing battle on this one. But hey, I pay my fees pursuant to SB
Thanks for the
1. Thank you.
$100, Jim.
Exactly. But that's the point, is that we all need to realize that even with gas tax revenues up now because the price of gas is up, the reality is this state, probably more so than any other in the country, is leading the nation in terms of conversion to alternative fuel vehicles. And that means this system that California adopted in 1922 isn't going to work 10, 15 years from now. And I would say our Caltrans finance expert sitting over there will probably give us some perspective on this. But we do need to be mindful of the fact that this body really, in my mind, along with UC Davis, along with other experts, such as the report that Professor Wax was involved with last year, is going to have to send a message through the commission in its annual report and eventually directly to the legislature and to the governor that we need to continue to lead the charge in this state to transition us at some point to another form of funding. You know, I see other agencies like LA Metro are looking at congestion-based pricing based on miles right now, and that might make sense in high-density metropolitan areas. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that this idea that we have has both its proponents and a lot of opponents. And it's going to take a lot of work to figure out what is going to be the best way to move forward. Is it technology? Is it a pay-at-the-pump system? What kind of pilots are going to be done? Are we partnering with the federal government as we go forward? Or are we going to just be California? Are we partnering with other states? So I believe that the work that this task force has before it is substantial, is important, because there's no other group in the state that's doing this except for the people sitting around this table. So I just wanted to offer that as perspective.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Finnegan?
You know, I'll add on to that for just a second. I agree with what Jim said, and I think, as Lucy said at the beginning of the meeting, you know, now that SB 1 and Prop 6 are behind us, some of the attention, you know, not necessarily amongst folks in this room, but amongst many, is not so much on transportation funding, I don't think. And so it's easy to let things just fall into the background and not have things move forward. And so I think this group can play and should play a key role in moving that forward, and I would add, in that moving forward in the right way, in what's going to be both effective and acceptable, and timed right and done right. So I'll just add that.
Very good. Any other comments? Yes, Lisa?
So a couple of weeks ago, some of us had an opportunity to meet with Peter DeFazio, Congressman, Chair of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee in D.C., and he mentioned that even at the federal level, they are feeling the impact in the Highway Trust Fund with the gas excise tax and the depletion of revenues that are now going into it. So I think the number he threw out was something like they're expecting a reduction of almost $17 billion this year with regard to revenues into the trust fund, and what are we going to do on a moving forward basis. I think VMT is certainly something they're looking at the federal level, and I was talking to Jim this morning about we need to somehow tie what we're doing here with our 5,000 vehicle pilot program and maybe another pilot program into what they're doing at the federal level, because I think at the federal level they're realizing, well, we need a pilot program at the federal level, but how do we put that together, because it is so massive. I mean, just what we put together in the state here was enormous. So I think they are looking at options, and the governor, I just came off a two-day meeting at CSAC, and we had an opportunity to talk to the governor about not only homelessness, but transportation and what we're doing here at the state level, and he is cognizant that we are having a reduction in revenues. It's a declining revenue source going into our funding for transportation infrastructure for the state of California, and then we need to be looking at options. And I know that trying to get the message across to everyone is sometimes difficult, because a lot of people, when you talk about VMT, they think, oh, VMT, that's going to be an additive tax to the gas excise tax, and truly it's a replacement. So getting that message across, I think, is really important to the consumers at large, because they'll feel more comfortable knowing this is a true, you know, hopefully revenue neutral replacement for the gas tax, and that we do realize we need to move off of the excise tax onto something else in order to be sustaining for our transportation funding in the future.
Very good, excellent, thank you. Yes,
Thank you, Chair Dunn.
thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to just jump into, can you hear me?
I can,
Okay, sorry?
We can hear you.
we can hear you.
Cool,
It's
okay.
good.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. I just want to layer onto it. I get the privilege of hanging out with a lot of young people, and that's why I look so young. And, you know, they are very aware of the ticking time bomb of climate change. They are very concerned about it, and I actually was very interested to read a Yale poll recently that found 81% of American voters are in favor of some form of a Green New Deal. I've been thinking about a Green New Deal a lot lately, and it's, one version of it is this huge, massive thing out in the future. But if you look at the resolution in Congress, it's interesting to think of it as a policy template for how we spend our revenues going forward. And I appreciated, Jim, your bringing up the new legislation that we're continuing to meet under. And as I recall last year, and I've missed a few meetings, but we did talk about our charge is broader now than just how we raise the revenues and piloting that. How do we expend the revenues is also part of the discussion. And so I'd just like to put on the table, and this may come up in item 13 later, but that we should start thinking about state gas tax and road charge revenues as a possible place to be putting a down payment on a triple bottom line of, great mobility options for Californians with every dollar spent, at the same time as reducing carbon emissions, at the same time as creating good paying jobs.
Excellent. I am in alignment with you, Richard, on that one, and I've been trying to think deeply, personally, about how do we connect the neutrality of the road charge legislation. It's to look at an alternative, revenue neutral, but recognizing it could be a good tool in the toolbox at some point to help us with climate change goals. So we need to think about that deeply and not scare people off, but that's very good that we're on that same page. I think that's important. And I also agree with Supervisor Bartlett, when you look at, the 2020 election has already started, right? The race has already started. And candidate after candidate, including the president, have been talking about infrastructure funding. And how do we get our good work in that dialogue to help them frame it as an action plan in some way at the federal level? Because ultimately, it would only be successful, I think, at that point. So really good comments, and that will help us with our discussion as we go further down on the agenda. Good. Any other reports then from folks? Okay, so now we're going to move on to agenda item 6, an overview of today's meeting. And as you can see, we do have a lot to go over today. The first thing, with your permission, I would like to ask if we could make this a working lunch. For a couple of reasons. There's a lot to go over, it's true, but I want to be respectful of your time, and instead of just breaking to a restaurant or someplace, I think we've made arrangements already to have lunch brought in, and then we'll take a little comfort break, pick up your lunch, but keep coming back, and then hopefully get to your flights and travel arrangements a little bit quicker for the end of the day. So with your permission, we'd like to make that part of the process for today. We talked about the passage of SB1, and which was a huge relief. Studies protecting, however, the future of the fuel tax from both UC Davis and the Mineta Transportation Institute have estimated that fuel tax revenues will continue to decrease as cars become more fuel efficient, notwithstanding the feds trying to reduce the CAFE standards. I think automakers are still producing cars that are trying to approach that 54 miles per gallon charge. So it's going to be very interesting to see where that goes. But this is why California and other states, we continue to study road charge. So Anthony Buckley from Washington State Department of Transportation will be calling into our meeting to give us an update on road usage charge west and a proposed national road charge pilot. So right in line with things we've talked about. Next, we are fortunate to have our California State Transportation Agency Secretary, Brian Annis, here, maybe for your last meeting, because congratulations, he has just been appointed as Chief Financial Officer for the High Speed Rail Authority, or condolences, as I said, I'm not quite sure which one it is. But who knew that Brian Annis was such a brainiac in economics? If you look at his resume, it's pretty impressive, and the right man for the job. So congratulations, Brian, on that appointment. We will miss you. Thank you, thank you. But an important project to have your expertise, and again, that understanding of the bigger picture and how everything can connect in state government, I think is so important. We tend to be so siloed here, so I really appreciate your work. So you're going to talk and give us a perspective on road charge issues and the TAC recommendations from last year. So you're on the agenda. We also have Stephen Keck and Carrie Porvahidi from Caltrans to provide an update on their road charge research efforts. And I'm sure our TAC members are going to be very interested to hear your comments. And then a brief overview of Caltrans Research Group. They have a large research effort in progress covering a wide range of transportation issues. Given the resources and funding that Caltrans has at its disposal, I'm hoping we can learn that road charge-related research is a key area of focus for this program. On agenda item 13, the adoption of our road charge TAC guiding policy and action plan. This is the more important items that we've already started to touch on today. And as you know, TAC is the statutorily created body responsible to assess the potential for road charge in California, and therefore, we need to ask ourselves, is California on track to be positioned to implement a road charge? Are we conducting enough research? Are we asking the right questions? Are we carrying enough demonstration programs, monitoring with what is happening in other states? Do we need to step up our road charge research efforts? Is Caltrans doing enough? Do we need to torture them more? So fun discussion that we look forward to having on that topic. And that is a pretty big agenda. Any questions or comments on that run through? Anything that we were missing that you were hoping we should add? I think that's pretty full. So I'm not even going to wait too long to ask for any more comments. So, okay, good. All right, so moving right along, that's the overview on agenda number 6. So now we move to agenda number 7, legislative update and review of the TAC role. Garth, you're going to give us any legislative updates on related bills and review our current statutory language directing our efforts.
Okay,
You're on.
great. Thank you. TAC members, I just wanted to let you know, on the state side, we're not aware of any bills that have been introduced relating to road charge right now, so there's not much going on within state legislature. As was brought up, at the national level, there has been some discussion on doing some sort of national road charge pilot, and as the chair mentioned, we'll get a more thorough update from Anthony Buckley from Washington State Department of Transportation a little bit later. And so moving on, so that's all on legislation. And then I wanted to bring to your attention in your book item on attachment A, we just printed out the current statutory language, and I think sometimes it's good to kind of crack open and looking at the statutory language and relating to the road charge, and then also the role of the road charge TAC. And so you'll see on there that in yellow on the first page, and then also on the second or the third page of the handout in attachment A, that's the language that has been brought before the TAC before. That's as a result of SB 1328, the Bell Bill, which extended the life of the TAC to January 2023 from this year was due to sunset in 2019. And then also you'll see that it states, that the TAC, shall continue to assess the potential for mechanisms, including but not limited to a mileage-based revenue collection system to use as an alternative method for the existing gas tax. And so it just, in my mind, it kind of reiterated the role of the TAC. Also highlighted in blue, that's from the prior language in SB 1077 back in 2014 that started the road charge program here in California, and the pilot, that yes, you as a TAC can request Caltrans to conduct additional research as you deem necessary. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention in terms of the statutory language relating to the role of the TAC, and that's all I have right now.
Great. Steve?
So Garth, in the yellow section on the first page there under item number 2, that wording is a little bit broader than the initial authorizing legislation for this TAC, is that correct?
From SB 1077, correct.
Right. So I think it's important that we all keep in mind that language, I view that as fairly expansive on what this group can do, at least look at and to recommend and to request. So I think that it's broader than that very limited pilot that we were originally conceived to be in charge of.
That's a good point, because it does say, but not limited to. So that's very good. Any other questions or comments for Garth?
Yes.
Lauren?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to ask a question that came to mind when Richard made his remarks earlier, and he said that we have a role in recommending or considering how the money that would be raised by this would be spent. And I don't see that anywhere here. And so I was curious if I could ask both of you, but where that's coming from. I guess I have to turn this off.
Yeah, Lauren, I mean, first of all, I would say this is something that came up very early on in our deliberations or in our discussions as a TAC. And at that early point, what I took away was that we were saying, this is not what we're doing right now, but it's something that we want to come back to, a discussion about that. And part of it came up in the context of social equity, because the equity implications of a road charge exist both in terms of how the money is raised and how it's spent. In terms of I think this language is expansive, and I think that it allows us to discuss those questions. It's not that we're going to be bringing forward legislation on that, but I think this body has been a source of new thinking, and it's a place where a lot of different perspectives can come together. And this is a question that needs to be discussed, and I would urge us to not shy away from that.
Just to react to that, I think that's a reasonable perspective, and we've talked about this from time to time over the last, however long it's been, a couple of years. I would just, I guess my only admonition would be that I think that fits comfortably within one of the missions here, which is social equity. But I wouldn't want to bootstrap, and so I would sort of call that out. But I wouldn't want to bootstrap the language in here to broaden it to just to a wide range of spending strategies of this money. I think that we're given a charge to modernize the state's transportation revenue system with and understanding some of the constraints for that, whether it's privacy, whether it's social equity, and I would. And there may be some appropriate discussion of how to spend the money in that context, but I just wouldn't want to, maybe to put a finer point on it, step so far into the shoes of the Transportation Commission as to make us both uncomfortable.
Jim?
I don't think that, I hear what you're saying, Lauren. I don't think the Transportation Commission is going to get into telling the legislature what to do when it comes to setting rates. But I do think that this committee, which is one step removed from the CTC as advisory to the CTC, should in fact give some consideration to that. You could send it out to the LAO, you could send it out to the state auditor, you could send it out to some third-party group. But we need to get beyond a vacuum of information. So somebody's got to be able to say something. And I hear where you're going and what you're suggesting, but I also want to make sure that, as I said in my initial comments, this thing is going to come up on us quickly. One day, somebody's going to wake up 5 years from now and they're looking at budget reviews and they're going to go, holy smokes, the revenue on transportation continues to go down. Wait a minute, I thought we approved SB1. I thought that fixed everything. Well, I think everybody needs to realize that while SB1 was a huge fight, and as our vice chair said, we kind of laid low as a TAC almost for 2 years while we let that process go through. But the reality is, SB1 was nothing but stopgap funding for a problem that is imminent to change. You know, having the California Trucking Association sitting on this panel is extremely important because I had an interesting conversation and I got in a good argument. Eric, you'd be proud of me. Somebody was telling me yesterday, well, if the truckers would just pay their fair share, everything would be fine. And, you know, we realize that trucking is what moves goods in our state, and yes, they do pay a lot. But, you know, we also realize that there's a lot more private vehicles out there than trucks. So we've got to figure out ways that we continue to advance the ball here to keep it out on the minds of legislators, policymakers, regional governments, that we need to have a solution to funding transportation into the future. And I do believe one of the things that this TAC, I've said it before, it was that I think we considered it as a recommendation to the commission. Ms. Branson could speak to it. You know, the state of California, they have a huge fleet. They ought to start paying by the mile yesterday. Every state, every Caltrans truck, every state vehicle should be paying by the mile today. Start someplace. I don't think the federal government is going to do a good job with a pilot compared to what this state did. I think we've got a lot more going for us. I think the federal government ought to bolt on to what we do if there's going to be another pilot. But just think about every state vehicle. That's a place to start. And then let's talk to the utilities. PG&E, Edison, SDG&E, they have quite a fleet. Let's make them paid by the mile and go from there to start moving it out. That's what we should be doing now, not waiting for something to change or something to happen, because by then it's going to be too late.
Ms. Chairman?
Mr. Finnegan, and then Susan.
I'll try to be brief. I think a lot of good comments were just made. I do appreciate Lauren's comment. I think if you recall, in the last couple of years, we were hemmed in and instructed not to veer into the policy arena. We were told to look at, you know, a pilot of how things could work and to deal with certain issues like privacy and whatnot. I think that to a degree that's being lifted from this committee, but at the same time, I think Lauren has some good advice that if we want to continue to move this ball forward, we need to do it in practical, pragmatic ways that ultimately are acceptable to the majority of people. So I agree with a lot that's been said, and I appreciate your comments, Lauren.
And a lot of this discussion is going to be really important to kind of like hold on to when we get to, you know, our developing our plan of action. So don't lose those thoughts, because that needs to be part of the overarching discussion. Susan.
I just wanted to bring forward that we try to get across that this will not be an additive tax, won't be on top of gas tax, and yet when we call it revenue neutral, that's not really true, I don't think, because we are recognizing, as Jim was just saying, the revenue, you know, developed today isn't enough, and particularly federally. So we have to find a way of communicating that, which I realize it's difficult, because if we don't say that, it doesn't sound right to people.
Yeah.
So that it's a difficult situation. I just wanted to bring that forward. And then I really support the idea of moving forward with government cars. I think that's where we should be going. And then along with that, I think we should be putting some effort into some like positive marketing, sort of setting the narrative, so that if we start to put the words out now that we want out there, and we make sure that people hear that, and then we set the conversation. And I think we should do that before we lose control of that, and it goes a way that we don't want it to go.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
I wanted to, I very much appreciate.
Hit your button.
Oh,
There
my,
you go.
there you go. Very much appreciate this conversation. I wanted to take one step back, based sort of on what Richard said a few minutes ago, which is, I would also like us to think a little bit about what is the vision of transportation in the future. and you look at the millennials and you look at the younger generation, and their view is not the private car, right? And sure, yes, what we're talking about does apply to rideshare, and it was quite refreshing, actually, 2 meetings ago when we had a young woman from Uber came and spoke to us, right? So I would say that perhaps we ought to engage someone to do a small study of predicting a future transportation model. I mean, yesterday Elon Musk said, what, thousands of self-driving taxis in a year? I mean, it's Elon Musk. But I think there's a jump. I mean, I understand we do talk about, self-driving cars, we do talk about reduced ownership, we do talk about rideshare, but really, what is transportation going to look like in the state of California in 10 years, right? And then the other comment is, it was refreshing to have that young woman here from Uber. Perhaps we should find someone to sit on the commission that doesn't have gray hair.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, Pam.
Right, and just to add, and what it really is all about is mobility and access. I mean, we are a piece of that.
I'm sorry, but Lauren was offended by that. Just want to put that in the record.
Right. So it's about roads, but using roads for people, to support people's ability to have the mobility, and the reason you have mobility is so you can access those services you need throughout your life. And I just wanted to also comment that there's a relationship to climate change, to how greenhouse gas, the transportation sector is one of the larger emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, and how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, how we use our roads, it's important. And it's not just cars. I mean, we're talking about the pilot that charges per mile for, I think, motorized vehicles. But we do need to make sure in the future that our road network does grow to have lanes for slow-moving vehicles, whether they be the electric scooters or other kinds of multi-mobility. So there are a lot of things that are related to this. But I think we're the Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee, but we really are part of that mobility and access policy making.
Very good. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Garth. All right, so we now have a bit of a framework, and we've sort of even started talking about the main event for this afternoon, but our next item is to have Anthony Buckley join us. Is he scheduled now, or do we wait?
Yes, Chair,
till
he'll be, we're going to call him, and
Okay.
so I would just request anybody that's going to has a question for Anthony, just make sure we speak into the microphone so he can hear it as well on the
Great.
telephone. And we've tested it, so it should be working okay.
So he's
So
going to
Jen
be like
just-
the voice
Jen-
of God here.
Yeah, I think so. That's
Okay. Great.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello. Anthony Buckley,
Hi,
this
good
is
morning.
Anthony Buckley, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Lucy.
Fantastic. This is Lucy Dunn, and we welcome you to our Road Charge Committee meeting, our TAC, and you are our agenda item number 8 as Director of Innovative Partnerships Program at Washington State Department of Transportation. You're going to be providing an update on Ruck West and a proposed National Road Charge Pilot Program. You got a full room of TAC members here, ready to hang on your words.
Well, great. Good morning, everyone. Just by way of quick background, yes, I'm the Director of Innovative Partnerships at WashDOT. I've been there for a little over 3 years. My focus is primarily on public-private partnerships. By way of the road user charge, I'm the liaison to the Washington State Transportation Commission in their work on road user charge. I'm a board director, a member of the board for the Mileage-Based User Fee Association out of Washington, D.C. I am the co-chair for the steering committee of Ruck West. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of insight into how I come to know Ruck.
Great.
I want to give you, by way of an update, there are 3 areas I'd like to focus on during my time. One is the Mileage-Based User Fee Association. Again, that's a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. and it's the acronym actually sounds out to be MBUFA. And I joke, and I just joked with the board yesterday. There is this east-west divide on RUC/MBUFA. On the East Coast, it's known as MBUF. On the West Coast, it's known as RUC. And I told him, that's kind of that old East Coast, West Coast rivalry. We have to come to some decision on a name someday. MBUFA is responsible or has been tasked by Congress to gather information from states and the private sector for a proposed national pilot, national RUC pilot. The thought being that in the next large transportation bill, the Congress will direct that a national pilot be launched. The form and kind of basically what that looks like is still being debated. What I can tell you is MBUFA held a workshop back in in November where we had states and private sector involved, gathered information. The information from that meeting, that workshop, was put into a document that was delivered to Congress, to the Transportation Committee of Congress, I believe last week. It spells out 6 key guidelines for pulling together or modeling what this national pilot should look like. It recognizes that a pilot is extremely important in continuing the work that many states like California, Washington, Oregon, and others on the West have undertaken in piloting road user charge. So that's really the national pilot update. There's not a lot of meat on the bone. It's under consideration. And BUFA is holding its annual meeting on June 18th in Washington, D.C. We do expect to hear more then as far as progress and where Congress is. So that's the MBUF update. The next item that I want to give you a really brief update is on regards Utah. The state of Utah is a member of the RUC West Consortium. And and I'm not sure, I'm not going to assume that there's a lot of knowledge on how RUC West is modeled out, but it's basically a 14-member consortium of Western states. We've tiered the states in such a way that are more conservative, kind of just want a seat at the table. States are following or staying in up to date on RUC. We have a tier 1 states are those states who have an active RUC legislatively authorized program. Tier 2 states are those states that have pilots, are really serious in the undertaking of RUC research. And then Tier 3, which are a majority of our members, are again those conservative states who just want to be at the table and following along, but contributing to the conversation. Utah in 2017 and late 2018 was a Tier 3 state. In 2018, their legislature directed the DOT to implement a RUC program for alternative fuel vehicles. Utah DOT has to have that program up and running by January 1st of 2020. They did create an advisory committee. The committee has met several times, and it's similar to both the advisory committee, the stakeholder group that you guys are sitting on in that room today. They contemplate, or right now what we know is that their system is going to be a voluntary program that alternative fuel vehicle owners may opt into at the time of their annual registration renewal. This is in lieu of paying a flat fee in the program. In the program, participants sign up with a third-party account manager that will collect and report miles driven using in-vehicle technology. The participants will place a credit card on file and set up a prepaid wallet from which mileage fees will be deducted periodically. The payment of their per-mile fee stops once the accumulated total for the year is equal to what the current existing annual flat fee is. The account manager provides a phone app or another method for submission of the odometer capture photo at enrollment and a yearly true-up photo to make sure that the mileage on the file corresponds to the actual odometer readings. They do have alternatives for people with privacy concerns. They can basically opt out or opt into a limited data retention, or the other alternative is to just continue business as usual and pay the flat fee. That's the Utah update. The last part of this is the Ruck West update. So again, Ruck West being the multi-Western state consortium, they have received, we've received 2 federal grants to date to undertake a pilot of a road user, an expanded road user program on the West Coast. The Ruck West pilot will test interoperability of the Oregon and California Ruck systems, creating a platform that other states may join in as they become ready. A successful regional pilot will demonstrate that systems can be integrated and standardized to accommodate multiple states' requirements, processes, systems, rates, and laws. With the agility that we think that this pilot will prove out, road user charge will be able to expand to include more states and eventually the nation. Further, the pilot will demonstrate that two funding mechanisms, road user charge and fuels tax, can operate together seamlessly without double taxing drivers. There are 9 member states that are participating in the regional pilot. California and Oregon are the lead states in this pilot, or they are the states that will actively participate by working directly with our business partners, other state agencies, and our other participating states to develop technical and administrative requirements, review and certify pilot-related data and financial records, administer their associated account managers, provide customer support and communications to system users, and monitor project performance. As monitoring states, those other than California and Oregon, being Colorado, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Utah, and Washington, we will contribute to project research and policy development while observing the progress and evolution of the operation. The actual pilot, which we have tagged Phase 2, is expected to launch on July 1st, 2020. We spent a lot of time in Phase 1, which was a focus on designing the system and included reconciling business and system requirements between the states. Phase 2 is the follow-up effort to test the joint requirements. So again, it's actually executing the pilot July 1 of 2020. In closing, I'm going to say specific to the work that Ruck West is doing, we recognize that the disruptive technologies and new demands for capacity are driving more and more states to consider a Ruck program. These will impact all of the Ruck West states, so that the collaboration of all states is important. We, Ruck West, are meeting in our quarterly meeting in Idaho on Monday, and this is one of the topics that we're going to be discussing at our steering committee is whether to expand Ruck West membership to all DOTs. So all 50 states may become eligible at some point in time to be members of Ruck West. There is some similar work or some work that I would say, step back and say there's a more robust body of work that has been undertaken with Ruck West than on the other organization in BUFA side. And BUFA really is a policy-focused organization. They are an asset to this conversation as they are the boots on the ground in Washington, D.C., and are able to run to the Hill at a moment's notice and really help advance this conversation. So with that, or if there are any questions, I'm happy to do my best to answer them.
Great. Questions? Yes, Martin.
Mr. Buckley, can you elaborate a little bit on the way in which a national trial might flow from the Oregon and California trials? And in fact, there were other trials even earlier at the University of Iowa, University of Minnesota. How can a sort of continuous process that expands be undertaken, and rather than starting from scratch?
Mr. Martin, that's an absolutely great question, and it really fits to my role on the NBUF board. There's the states have done a tremendous amount of work individually and now looking at the issues around interoperability. What I've been voicing in the NBUF conversations are recognizing that we need to leverage the work of the states, not go and recreate the wheel. Part of this is we need to do a feasibility study on the national level to see exactly what can be leveraged. Is it feasible to do this on a national level? There is not a definitive answer today. In June, that conversation will continue. I am going to continue pushing that it is the states who really have the body of knowledge that can help the feds not waste a lot of time, money, and effort in solving or coming to getting to the squares that the states are in today. I do believe, and one of the reasons why Rough West is having a conversation around expansion is that Rough West, to me, and this is my own personal assumption, Rough West is the best positioned organization to lead a national conversation. We have done a tremendous amount of work on the West Coast.
Very good. Mr. Sawyer.
Yeah, this is Eric Sauer with the California Trucking Association. Appreciate the information. Are the other states discussing or including commercial motor vehicles in their pilots or studies? Because that goes along with the interoperability with the other states.
Eric, that really is state dependent. I think when you look on the East Coast, the I-95 Corridor Coalition, which represents many of the states up and down I-95 and on the eastern, they've been looking at tolling and trucks. And I really don't have a lot of detail there. I believe Missouri is focused in their piloting efforts specifically on heavy-duty vehicles. Anywhere else, it's been more of a conversation around commercial vehicles. Another exception would be Minnesota, who has been looking at how RUC would apply to fleet operations, and those fleets being, either TNCs, the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, or taxis and whatnot.
Good. Any other questions?
Well,
Yes.
Yeah, one more.
Richard.
My question is whether the potential for a technology to charge the fee at the pump is part of the discussion.
And I'm sorry, I think that name was Richard. I didn't catch your name.
Sorry, yes, Richard Marcantonio.
Hi, Rich. I believe that California is really at the forefront on the pump technology, or investigating the collection at the pump. Anywhere else, it's part of it. It's buried in the conversation. I don't see a lot of work being done at the pump, just at this point in time.
Thank you.
This is Terry Benzel, USC. I did hear, my concern is privacy and security, and I did hear you talk about some amount of opt-out, but I'm just wondering in your discussions how much concern you're seeing relative to the privacy and data sharing issues, number one, and number two, is anyone really looking at how we're protecting these large data stores? So there's the flip side of security and privacy there.
Those are serious issues that, regardless of which organizational hat I put on, have been vetted and continue to be vetted. On the privacy and security, I think what our research has shown is attitudes have been changing over time. Was initially, I believe there was huge concerns over privacy and protection of the data. As people have gotten more and more comfortable in the pilots, we've seen that concern somewhat dwindle. It's there. We won't ignore it, but there's a huge consideration going into the privacy and data security issue. I can tell you specifically, part of the motivation in the Washington pilot with working with private sector is because we, the state, don't want to own the data. We want our participants to be assured that Big Brother is not watching, not tracking, not collecting data on them, so that we can use it for other purposes. It continues to be a significant issue. On the protection of the data, I couldn't tell you anything else other than it is a focus of concern. How the private sector protects the data, how it is then used. We do want transparency, or we want them to be very forthright in dealing with our citizens and anyone else that comes into our state on a road user charge.
Jim Medeffer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a few comments I want to offer. First of all, in privacy and data, I think is utmost of importance to anything that we do. Clearly that, and of course the social justice pieces, I think we've long determined have been pinnacles at this Technical Advisory Committee for Protection of Citizens. It's interesting, I just saw something on the news not too long ago that one of the major auto manufacturers, and I'm sure they're all the same, they pretty much own all the data that they're collecting. Any vehicle pretty much manufactured over the last decade has got a cellular-enabled modem built in. That data, they are selling it, they're making money off of it, and they're making money off of the people that are driving these cars. Whether that's right or not, it's probably not right, and citizens ought to have the opportunity to opt out. I know the legislature is looking at legislation on that right now here in this state to allow citizens to opt out. The fact that that technology is out there, to me, then gets to the whole issue that Mr. Buckley's talking about and the MBUFA effort. And I know MBUFA, and it's a great group. And I believe it was at a conference I attended in D.C. probably 2 or 3 years ago, maybe longer, where I was probably inspired. Carrie and I were there about the whole pay-at-the-pump model. And in their case, it was more archaic. I think I took it a little bit further and then threw it to Carrie and Brady, and they've been running with it in our application to DOT, which we were able to get, the state got. And I wanted something more tech, high tech, to where the consumer has nothing to worry about. They pull in, the mileage data gets transferred, they pay, off they go. It's got to be that simple. And the worry I have, and I'd like to have you share with me, Mr. Buckley, what reporting methods are being considered right now on a national basis, number one. And then number two, let me just have you answer that question first, then I'll go to the other thing. What kind of reporting technology is being considered right now? Is there anything that you have to add on that?
So, Jim, great to hear your voice again, and you were one of the first voices I heard around the conversation about investigating the pay at the pump and being very strong and vocal on that. To your question, on the national level, I would say it is really too early, but what I have heard, and this is more rumor than anything, is that that Congress is considering right now, if they were to do a pilot tomorrow, a pilot that would enroll 50,000 participants, and it would be run by an insurance company. I don't know what insurance company they're referring to. I think they're just looking at those that do the insurance by mile right now. But as far as the mechanics, they're not there yet.
Okay, fair enough. And yeah, it's Progressive Insurance, and they have an OBD2 port that you plug into your car, and that's how you pay for your insurance. So there's no misunderstanding as to what company it is, and that's great. But with all due respect, I believe that's still archaic technology compared to what we ought to be thinking about. And that's all I'm going to continue to push. Is there's already technology in the vehicles today. We hear about it all the time. How do we take the technology that already exists in the vehicles and figure out a way to anonymize it to the point to where people don't have to worry about their private data being sold, as Ms. Benzel would talk about, and at the same time be able to allow a consumer to pay, instead of paying a gas tax, pay for the miles they drive. I get MBUFA's position. It's very heavily, and I don't blame it. Vendors, God bless the vendors that pay for MBUFA, but it's vendor-centric. And vendors have one thing in mind, and that's to sell their widgets and gadgets and gadgets. And I'm not into that. I think that the technology already exists in the vehicles. We should be using the technology in the vehicles. That's what a pilot should be looking at going forward. And I don't care if it's, again, and this is Ms. Dunn, and I think Ms. Branson knows this. This is where, if there's one thing the Commission and CARB might be able to agree on going forward into the future, would be some way or another to where future technology might be implemented into the vehicle that benefits both CARB and paying for transportation, and that just like CARB mandated the OBD2 port that the auto manufacturers were dead set against, but it was only because they started it here in California. It's now a worldwide device. And so if we figure out a way to where something gets put in the vehicle, at least over the next 20 years while we transition, as people still put gas into their cars, might be the next 30 or 40 years, who knows? But there ought to be a device that goes into the car that you match it up with the device at the pump. Mabufa is where I learned, what was the number, Carrie? 100,000 gas stations nationwide. It wasn't like there was that many when you think about it, compared to 40 million vehicles in the state of California. But if you start thinking about putting something in each car as it gets made that just transmits the data into the pump, that's one angle. Or using wireless telematic technology that already exists in just about every new car made today to be able to send that data. So that's the line of thinking I would like to think, and I haven't gone to talk to DeFazio or anybody at Congress. I'm just a private citizen anymore. But I mean, those are the kind of things that they ought to be looking at, not just doing something that we already did with our 5,000 car pilot. We saw how it worked. Let's now figure out ways to take it to the next level.
So Jim, and to your point, I will just add, I'm on the planning committee for the Above conference, and one of the panels that I'm putting together, I've actually want to start the conversation with the pump manufacturers. I used to work in the pump industry, so I'm hoping to get them interested in joining and playing a role in the development of ROC and the pay at the pump, which I do agree with you. I think it is the easiest and it's the path of least resistance.
Steve?
Quick question, and I apologize for my ignorance on this, but the pilot that was discussed with Progressive, so I'm sorry, where is that and when is that?
So, see, that was part of the discussion around what a national pilot might encompass. What I passed on to you was a rumor. I apologize that it is a rumor that Congress is thinking of working with an insurance company, presumably it would be Progressive, but it would be a 50,000 participant pilot. Nationwide is where they would hope to recruit from. It is not underway right now.
Thank you.
And this is a newbie question from Lucy Dunn. California is represented on both the Mbufa and on Ruck West. Who is that? Who's representing? Stephen Keck is there? Okay, it's interesting because I had no idea that we were doing that. Norma used to do it.
Norma used to give us updates.
And then, if I heard you correctly, Mr. Buckley, did you say that you're looking to implement a California-Oregon pilot by July 2020?
So that is the Ruck West pilot, and it would be July 1, 2020 is when they're looking to launch. That's focused on interoperability between California and Oregon.
So were you all aware of that? That here in our TAC?
We had received updates. I'll turn it over to Carrie and Stephen, but they have provided us updates.
Certainly, we have discussed it with this board before and brought them along, so to speak, as we were developing this research with Ruck West. In fact, Carrie today is going to give an update on where we are with that pilot, along with other things that we're doing.
Okay, good. Yes, Susan.
I'm just wondering, this is kind of a question, I suppose. So that study, that's interstate, but I'm wondering if it makes sense for California to be part of this pilot with their state vehicles, and maybe it's set up the way Jim's pointing it out, where we, pay at the pump. Maybe we trial that here during this time, along with the feds. I mean, this would take a lot of cooperation, and I'm not sure this will happen. But it just strikes me as, kind of a good incentive for us to do it then, and good data.
Good. Any other questions or comments? Well, this was fascinating conversation, and I think I was surprised that we're further along than I thought that we were, considering the conversation that we've got coming up in this this meeting. Mr. Buckley, do you have any questions for us and how we could be of assistance to you?
No, I have a great working relationship with your team down there, Carrie and Brady and others, but no questions at this time. I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Well, very enlightening, and appreciate very much your time, and we will now, with seeing no more lights on, we'll let you off the hook. All right?
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right.
Great. Any other comments or on this item? Very interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's further along than I thought it was. So, okay, very good.
One little comment.
Yes,
Just,
Susan.
I think we should note, because Jim Mandaffer said this earlier, that the feds, I just would almost doubt that they would do it better than the state of California just did it, you know? So that's why I feel like we should try to add, whether it's, we do the state vehicles and we do the pay at the pump idea or something, because I feel like potentially if we rely on this or we think, oh, great, we're moving forward and we'll wait next year, I don't think we'll be moving forward as much as we think we, or wish we would be.
Well, I
So-
guess that's what's so interesting to me. You may be right. I'm the newbie in the team, so I have a lot to learn. But I'm just fascinated that we've already got two states, California and Oregon, that are willing to do a pilot project. That seems the logical step to me, as opposed to relying on the feds, again, knowing that election is in everybody's minds right now. But I just found that interesting. Susan, yeah?
Yeah, if I could just add, I believe at our last TAC meeting, we shared or maybe Gar sent it to all of you. The commission held a tri-state commission meeting with Oregon and Washington transportation commissions. And at that time, the three commissions actually approved a letter that was sent over to the congressional delegation for each state, advising on the need for a national pilot and on the need for California, Oregon, and Washington to be the participants and to draw upon what has occurred in the California pilot program. So if you would like, we can resend that letter too, so that you all have it. I think we sent it out, it was quite a while ago, but also just want to mention that the chair of the Transportation Commission and myself had 2 meetings with Congressman DeFazio and on this subject, and we did share again the importance of having California at the table, drawing upon the expertise of this committee and on the work that has already been done by this committee and by Caltrans in California. So, I think it sounds like others of you have had similar conversations, but this is a huge issue that California is participating in, really informing what's done at the national level. So we'll get that letter out to you again.
It's great. Great conversation. Thank you very much. All right, we're ready to move on to agenda item number 9, our California State Transportation Agency response to the 2018 TAC and Commission recommendations. As you know, we approved 4 recommendations last year to the legislature, and I think they're included in your materials under tab 9. And we now have Secretary Annis as his parting gift to us to give us an update on the status of those recommendations.
Sure. Well, thank you, Commissioner Dunn, for your kind words at the top of the meeting here. And this is kind of the fun part of the job, if you will. When the announcement came out a few days ago that I'd be moving over to be CFO at High Speed Rail, I did question for a minute whether I should still attend this as sort of the lame duck status I'm now in. But as I said, this is kind of the fun stuff, and happy to share my thoughts. The Governor Newsom appointed David Kim to be the new Transportation Secretary, and several of you, I think, know David.
Yes.
I think that's a great choice. He's it's great to have that cross-pollination of government-level experience, and he was with the Obama administration for many years, has been with Hyundai Corporation since leaving the Obama administration, and was at LA Metro as well before that, and worked, I believe, with the California legislature for a period as well, serving I believe, Senator Roberti. So great experience, and look forward to, I'm sure, his engagement in the TAC moving forward as well. But yeah, happy to share my thoughts. And I think there's a lot of exciting work, and there's a lot of partnership opportunities here, I think, as we forward the recommendations and consider how to phase in the road charge and what's the first entrant in that phase in. One of the things I was kind of interested in toward the end of the last legislative session was some bills that did pass, Governor Brown did sign, that have to do with autonomous vehicles and transportation network companies that I think have some nexus to this. There was a bill by Assemblymember Ting, AB 1184, that granted the city and county of San Francisco taxing authority with voter approval to tax autonomous vehicles that provide rides, either on a TNC platform or by private owners of a autonomous vehicle. And that bill explicitly provides authority to charge a differential tax rate based on whether that is being provided as a pooled service with multiple riders or as an individual rider. And of course, since those TNCs are basically charging their customers based on the length of the trip, that does have an interesting nexus in my mind to some of this road charge thinking. And, in this case, you have the TNCs acting as the service provider, or as the if you will, the collector and the payer of the tax. And it's interesting, one of the challenges, of course, of the road charge relative to the excise gas tax is with the excise tax, you have very few payers of the tax, the refiners at the rack, they call it, working with the Board of Equalization, or now I guess the Department of Tax and Fee Administration to collect that. But in the TNC world, you have that similarity with fewer taxpayers or service providers that I think have a fairly administratively easy way to collect. And then from the audit perspective, fewer taxpayers has that advantage. So that's kind of one leg of it, although that, again, is limited to San Francisco, but I think that's definitely a bit of a pilot or foot in the door with, whether an expansion of that type of authority should occur to other cities or regions or counties going forward, or even at a state level. The other bill I wanted to mention was Senate Bill 1014 by Senator Skinner that provided the Air Resources Board with the ability to set emission standards for transportation network companies. And then with those emission standards, as I understand the mechanism, it might establish a baseline of greenhouse gases per mile, and then could include as well then GHG or greenhouse gas reduction plans to bring that down per mile. And in my mind, it's not specific in the bill of all the mechanisms that could be employed, but one of them would be further incentives of pooled rides, and perhaps differential, working with the TNCs on the differential between the pool ride fee and the single ride fee. And that would certainly be an emission reduction strategy. But the other one would certainly be an incentive for the TNCs to incentivize zero-emission vehicles in their partner fleets. And so, there could be other things as well. But, those two bills together, I think, kind of for TNCs and autonomous vehicles, kind of, at least indirectly, are mileage related, and and have the impact of starting to direct fee levels or charge levels for riders, but then also with the San Francisco case, kind of that money going to the government, and with that bill, that funds that would be collected from such a tax would be for transportation purposes in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So again, interesting models. I think, I'd certainly encourage the TAC to, follow these developments with the ARB as they develop their regulations around 1014. Are there any opportunities there to consider road charge components or think about how that works together? And with the zero emission vehicle piece as a standalone, I was interested in Mr. Buckley's summary of the Utah model and what they're currently looking at. In California, as was referenced with SB1, we had the $100 a year fee, flat fee for zero emission vehicles. And I'll say at the time that was added to the SB1 package, there was some controversy with that, with those that were afraid that would discourage sales of zero-emission vehicles. And UC Davis was asked to look at that. I think with the idea that this is an ongoing discussion, that we know the $100 fee is a starting place with SB1, but there was I think the issue of or concern about whether that would impact sales, and an openness to revisiting that in the legislature based on results on the ground, if you will. And as I was riding over on the train this morning with the Caltrans staff, we were talking about that UC Davis study, and I understand that you've heard it here as well, talked about it a bit, but I think that's an interesting nexus for the zero-emission vehicle look, and UC Davis was suggesting that perhaps that's an area where a mileage-based fee in some respects may be more favorable to the public in terms of not being a disincentive in any way than a flat fee. So, certainly be an encouragement.
Could I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
In addition to the $100 fee for clean fueled vehicles,
Right.
Didn't SB1 also increase a fee, an annual fee based on the value of the vehicles?
That's correct,
Isn't
yeah.
it also the case that electric vehicles tend to have high value, so they're paying actually quite a bit more than $100 in addition as a result of SB1? And I did some calculations which showed that actually state revenue from electric vehicles would go way up if we met Governor Brown's goal of whatever it was, 50,000 vehicles by a certain year, because of those two fees taken together. So it also seems to me logical, and this is entirely speculative, that if we compared the sum of those two and considered an alternative that was a mileage-based fee, the mileage-based fee actually could be more popular and more equitable.
Right.
But I think we're underestimating what SB1 does with revenue from electric vehicles, because that second fee is also part of it.
Yeah, and as you say, in part because of this big issue we're working on of realizing that with fuel efficiency we'll be losing revenue. SB1 tried to diversify the revenue stream, if you will, and also considering social equity, considering the correlation between lower value cars and income and things like that. Cars that are worth or valued at $5,000 or less have a $25 fee with SB1 annually. And I believe that the top fee was $175 a year for your Tesla, essentially, of those type of cars. I think it was $75,000 or more in value. And so that, as you say, as I guess the zero-emission vehicles represent a higher portion of new cars and a much lower portion of old cars, yeah, you are going to have more in that category, but it's non-discriminatory to the extent if you buy an $80,000 car, the fee's not different based on whether it's zero emission or non-zero emission, and then it's kind of the offset for not paying the gas tax that the $100 fee on zero emission vehicles would be covering. But yeah, I do. I think some of these avenues of phasing in a road charge may have more rationale than just revenue neutrality or maintaining revenue for transportation funds. It may also be some of these considerations of greenhouse gas emissions and autonomous vehicle regulation and things of that nature. So I think that might strengthen the case, if you will, for the phase-in that, and perhaps maybe the road charge might be a secondary motivation for the bill's authors, that I think in some of these other cases, they weren't necessarily considering the decline of the excise tax, but were considering congestion in San Francisco or some of these other problems to address. but that it does seem there's this nexus and overlap of policy considerations that might make some of the future phase-in involve a broader coalition, if you will, and broader purposes.
I'm sorry. Before we worry too much about Jim and his Tesla, the electric charge actually hasn't occurred yet. That starts in 2020,
Right.
and only for model year 2020 vehicles and later. So he would have to buy a new car. So
Oh, now I'm in trouble with Lucy again. I appreciate what you were saying, Secretary Annis, and I do think that and I remember Will Kempton and I think, met with Assemblymember Ting, early on, and he sounded very supportive. I believe I've heard that both Lyft and Uber have said they would support paying by the mile. I have long advocated, both here and as a member of the Transportation Commission, that before any autonomous vehicle is licensed to operate on a road in California, it should also be paying by the mile. That should be, I don't think any legislation has happened on yet. I believe the Commission made that as a recommendation. But those are the kind of things that I would think that this body, this Technical Advisory Committee, should be ringing a loud clarion bell on to whomever will listen. Granted, our process as we go through the Commission, but I think at some point, to Ms. Branson and Ms. Dunn, to Mr. Finnegan as the Vice Chair, I think that the folks on this TAC ought to look at the possibility of coming together with some solid messaging and reach out to, Mr. Frazier and other members of the legislature that understand this, like Assemblymember Ting, to consider advocating these things. Again, no disrespect to our United States Department of Transportation. There's some very fine people there. But I don't see how what the federal government, you've had the old adage, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. They're just starting out. They're going to have to really rely more on what has already started here in California on that piece. When it comes to California, again, I'll just repeat myself one more time. You've got a state fleet. How many vehicles, how many CHP vehicles are there, Brian? Just out of curiosity, any rough number?
Oh, boy.
You have that in your
I
portfolio.
certainly have a couple thousand at least.
Caltrans vehicles, probably
What do we have? I know we have 12,000 equipment units, but they're not all vehicles, right? Right.
Yeah, a tractor or a
Right.
snowplow, I get it.
Right.
But the point is, we see Caltrans vehicles everywhere. We see CHP vehicles everywhere. We see PG&E, Edison, SDG&E vehicles everywhere. There's certain things where these agencies or franchisees that are, on the utility side, they interface with government. And let's talk about water agencies. There's a lot of those. At some point, you start someplace and work your way out. I think that's how Mr. Finnegan, with his AAA hat on, could ultimately have his membership be more receptive to this, because you'll get all the bugs worked out in a much broader pilot than just 5,000. We could have our own 30,000 vehicle pilot in this state pretty easily, with just those aforementioned agencies I talked about.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the government vehicles, because I was going to comment on that in just the suggestion for a little more information from the TAC on what the additional benefits of a government fleet would be beyond the prior pilot, because I know there were some fleet vehicles in the prior pilot, because I do know when this comes up, there will invariably be, administrative cost, and then the idea of, how extensive is the recommendation in terms of, any exchange of revenue? Is it, again, a paper tracking exercise like the prior pilot, or would you actually?
No, I'd do it for real. I would actually start changing it to where eventually, I think this is where in your role and, Mr., your successor, where he's going to have to look at it, the DMV should be collecting the fees. I think eventually the public's going to start paying DMV fees monthly because car registrations continue to get higher and higher. This is a way that they can pay their miles that they drive, as opposed to just buying it at the gas pump.
To what extent
to
what extent are government vehicles exempt from paying gas tax now, though? Some are.
Yeah, so in general, state vehicles are not exempt from paying gas tax, except for in certain circumstances for emergency vehicles. So all of our
CHP
Caltrans
would
vehicles,
be
we use
exempt.
gas tax revenue to pay the gas tax.
Okay, so CHP, there was only a few thousand. There's probably a lot of Caltrans vehicles, other state vehicles that would fall into it. Point is this, to you, Brian, I believe that if we start working this in now, you build a system, whether it be through DMV, we start figuring out ways to collect it. That's how we can build a robust system. We're not ready for 39 million, however many registered vehicles there are in this state, to start doing this tomorrow, nor is the public ready to start paying it. But we have to figure out a way to start getting there and building a system, and perhaps this might be a step in the right direction.
So I guess that's Mr. Secretary, that was the purpose for this agenda item. There were 4 things that the commission recommended: government vehicles, planning for implementation, telematics for new vehicles, and disadvantages community impact. Those 4 things. And if we could get a report on what the status is on all of those 4 recommendations. Number 1, thanks, nice idea, but we're ignoring you. Number 2, nothing's done yet. Number 3, we're doing that. That would really be helpful to us to figure out what our next steps need to be, either from you or Caltrans or from Mr. Kim, or run through them.
Sure, and I was going to, this might overlap a bit with the next item.
There you go.
No, someone turned me off. I guess one at a time, huh?
Right.
That's how it works.
That would be
Got it.
great. That would be great. And it helps me too,
Right.
to catch up to you guys, because you guys are all so much smarter than me.
Right. Well, as far as the issues that I think would require legislation if it's actual changes in,
Correct.
how we collect taxes, we have no legislative proposals in the area of the phase-in. I don't
Right.
believe there's any legislative proposals right now.
Right.
But certainly we would, I know the agency, if members are supporting any, or forwarding any legislation going through committees, would be happy to provide technical assistance.
And is that something that the agency would support, is including all government vehicles in the next round of pilot, or have you not studied that yet?
I guess on that one, I know there's excitement for getting started. I guess I just think about the internal conversations on the technicalities of
Right.
implementing this. The staff needed to be added, the systems to be set up. So I was sincere when I said I think that would be helpful to get more information on the
Right.
benefits the tax sees of doing that, other than the general, we're getting started this way.
Got it.
And then on the revenue side, again, it's a little odd, especially as Stephen was alluding to in the Caltrans case, that, we pay the excise tax when we buy gas for Caltrans vehicles. That recycles back to the department for buying gas and other Caltrans purposes. But again, would this end up being a revenue neutral exercise for departments? I can see the conversation with CAL FIRE, for example.
Yeah.
If they're buying this, is this reducing their budget in some way, increasing their costs, increasing their administrative staff? What's the level of effort that would have to be engaged in by departments with government fleets to accomplish this? And I do think that's not an insignificant consideration when we have the discussion within the department. It may be, a smaller discussion on the Caltrans side, is there some portion of the fleet we might do to further the effort? And that perhaps is it could be an administrative, more of an internal discussion in the family. But certainly if we're looking at a broader discussion where we're talking about Department of General Services fleet and CAL FIRE fleet and Highway Patrol fleet, these considerations, is this a net loss of revenue for the Highway Patrol where, they'd be looking at.
So what would the process be to
Yeah.
capture all of that? And is that something that comes with the Secretary of Transportation calling a meeting and saying, here's a recommendation from the commission and the TAC that we move
Right.
forward on this item?
Right.
What should our next steps be? I mean, even if it's to push
Yeah.
back and say, sorry, nice try, but for the following reasons, we're not going to go down that path. But I guess that's what, we're looking
Right.
for, some good
Sure.
some good input
Yeah.
back to us.
And this might be an area where we can work at a staff level and then report back,
Yeah.
perhaps your
That would be
commission
great.
staff, the Caltrans TAC group, be helpful again to get a better understanding of what the TAC recommendation specifically is.
Sure.
Because, again, I just think Caltrans, for example, both has some fuel delivered to their maintenance facilities in a
Sure.
big above-ground tank.
Sure,
I
sure.
think they pay the excise tax on that. But I'm not sure, again, on this revenue side of, I think we would end up paying the gas tax initially. And then I guess if there was a refund that you're working on with the Department of Tax and Fee Administration, that might get to your statutory change. But all this to me highlights the complexity of this.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not looking
yeah.
for solutions, it's just
Right.
what would the process be
Right.
to come up with a good analysis
Right.
of support
Right.
or opposition to,
Right.
because it's both a TAC and it's a
Right.
CTC recommendation.
Right.
So I'm, maybe something to take back and maybe we
Yeah.
can think about that for the next time we
It
get
does seem
together.
like, some of the, again, Caltrans is a fleet owner, but also a Department of General Services might be good to participate. And with, again, staff and just hash out, how would this technically work?
Right.
Because I don't think we can advocate for it externally until some of these details, some of these questions
Of
are
course.
answered. I certainly couldn't see myself, testifying before a Legislative Policy Committee
Of
or
course.
Budget Committee.
Oh, no, this
without
has to
having-
all be done internal. I totally
Right.
get that first, but I guess that's where we made these recommendations, and I suppose they shouldn't just float out there. It would be nice to have, a conclusion one
Sure.
way or the other
Sure.
with some deep thinking on
Right.
what it works. From the private sector's perspective, if you've got a public that is a little nervous
Right.
about road charge and throwing it to government vehicles first, it's a far more comfort level to see if that could work or be successful or not.
Right.
And then to go, see, public, it works for government,
Right.
so maybe it could work for you in the private sector, stop being so nervous about it. So that's why I think we're looking for some deep thinking here, and maybe, a good faith effort on what the process would be to pull together the information we need to make good decisions out of both the agency. Thanks, CTC, nice try. Thanks, TAC, nice try, but it will or wouldn't work for the following reasons.
Right. But I'm happy to, for my follow-up, I talked to the DGS Director, Dan Kim, on several occasions, so I will
That'd be
reach
great.
out to him and maybe ask the Caltrans team to, maybe do the planning of setting up this meeting with your staff
That'd be
as
great.
well as
That
the
would be
next
great.
step on that one.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Secretary.
And then again, I think it kind of covered the other three types: shared mobility, autonomous.
And Secretary?
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, we have a manager from Fleet Operations at Department of General Services. I didn't know if he had anything he wanted to say, if you wanted to.
Sure. Madam Chair, my name is Evan Spear. I'm the Chief of the Office of Fleet and Asset Management for the Department of General Services. My office has general oversight over the state fleet, so I wanted to jump in and offer our assistance with
Thank
this.
you.
So
Thank you.
we had kind of convene a quarterly State Equipment Council meeting with all fleet managers within the state fleet. This is where we discuss statewide policy, any initiatives that would impact the fleet. I think that's a perfect avenue to kind of review these recommendations, conduct the analysis, bounce it off of the people who are out there driving these vehicles,
Thank
and
you.
see what the operational issues may or may not be. So,
Awesome. That's really helpful. Thank you. Lauren?
Thank you. Brian, congratulations. And thank you for your service on the Transportation Agency. I was actually looking forward to this item. I thought this was the most important item on the agenda today. And I think it's serendipitous that you're coming to us as a lame duck. Because I was wondering, to the best of your ability and desire, just to take a step back from from the detail of these. I'm really curious as to what the current administration's position is on road user charges and on what it is we're doing, because we're moving along, the commission is moving along with the tailwinds from the previous administration that was supportive. Governor Brown signed a couple pieces of legislation, made Caltrans and his appointees on the commission available to what we're doing, tamped us down appropriately during the campaign and sort of come back to life. But I want to be mindful. I mean, I and my organization support what we're doing, but I want to be mindful of what the new administration has in mind as well, because it doesn't do anybody any good to work really hard on something that they don't want to have done or may not consider to be one of the highest priorities. So I'm curious as to whether you have some insight on that.
Well, I'm afraid I can answer in a very general way, but yeah, I've not talked about the road charge with Governor Newsom. I do, as you look at these things in terms of comments he's made and some of his general philosophy to government, he's certainly called for innovation and new ways of approaching issues. I read his book Citizenville, and it's a very good thing to look at if you happen to kind of give his view of government, that a lot of times, government stands in the way of innovation and is resistant to new approaches. So that's what I can say, that I think within this administration there'd certainly be interest in looking at new ways to do things, and certainly looking at the changes ahead with technology. This administration very strong on greenhouse gas reduction as well. So I know there's a full commitment to, we're seeing those fuel economy standards go up. And, so I think, again, I'm fairly confident in saying there will be continued interest in this, just because of how this connects to the policy initiatives that I know the governor's publicly spoken about.
Yeah, that's good. Mr. Medaffer?
I was just going to say it's great to have the guy in charge of fleets at DGS here. I understand you have close to 250,000 vehicles throughout the system. Somebody just texted me.
We have about 50,000 statewide.
Oh, so 250 is a bad number then. Okay, well, 50,000 we'll take. But the point is, to the extent, and I appreciate what you said, we did a 5,000 vehicle pilot in this state. I think it was very successful. We figured out which recording methods we would definitely not use in the future. Ms. Branson's daughter could certainly explain the one that she didn't enjoy. Yeah, she didn't like the phone one, so anybody that thinks that you can use a smartphone to connect to the car, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, my daughter uses her phone a lot, and it drained her battery, and she dropped out of the program. So in my role, I thought that we need to do a lot of work on the phone app.
So there's one example. But point is, we all know that the most popular one was the OBD2 port, and perhaps you're already using that in the fleet now, in some cases, certainly to monitor performance, monitor drivers to make sure they're not going over the speed limit, et cetera, and knowing where all the various vehicles are. But that technology that's already coming in might be integrated, and that's where I think the state, through an RFP process or an RFI, through Caltrans, or if it's the commission, would be able to really gain a greater insight as to how we could utilize the existing DGS fleet throughout the state to learn from and figure out how we could start making this thing work better. And to exactly what the chair just said, if it can work for government, if we can get the bugs out with government, then it's going to be a heck of a lot easier to transition to the public. And let's face it, this isn't going to work unless it's the public. So great to have you here, and thank you for being willing to participate. And Mr. Annis, I would suggest to David Kim that one of the first things he does is really think about, he's going to have to start thinking about how do we fund transportation going forward. And I don't see any other solution other than a mileage-based approach.
So there were three other things, and I don't know, Stephen or Carrie, if you wanted to help the secretary, but the three other things were the planning for implementation of the road charge for California, telematics for new vehicles. Again, I recognize we need legislation, but if there's any more research that you're doing internally, and then think about, we also recommended a UC study to follow on any impacts to disadvantaged communities. Those were the three other things. I'm just trying to close the box around this item. So, and if they're not ready, we can always bring it back. So.
Yeah, fair enough. Let me first say, I think Brian has laid out a very good framework of where we stand. Carrie's going to talk about some of the other items
Perfect.
we talked about today,
When we
including
can get to that.
disadvantaged communities, in vehicle telematics, and where we're going with our research
Great.
now and in the future. So I might address some of this.
Okay.
And then I think it behooves us to work with the, sorry, Brian, the new secretary, to develop specific answers to anything that we're not hitting
So we'll just
in the
bring this
next
back for
couple
the
items.
next meeting, and maybe we can delve, because I think, I'm not sure we were prepared for this one on all sides here. So that'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you.
If I could just add one quick point, and I know we've been going on a little bit here, but I think, I'm really glad that you crystallized those 4 items, because I think they're the pathway to moving forward on all fronts. It's something that we all agreed as a group, and so I think it's very important that the state come back to us with how we can, what is happening, and some of that might be covered a little bit, but then what do we need to do? What are the processes to move forward, and what are the roadblocks?
Right. We just don't want to leave things out in the ether. We would just like to conclude. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, for accommodating me and putting up with my
I
annoying.
might mention too, just on the research area, just for future consideration. We talked about a little bit about different avenues of research. I think that's the next item. Carrie will talk a little bit about something with the Community College Foundation, but just to mention, SB1 did include some new university research funding.
Yes.
And just wanted to indicate that does include a mechanism of UCs receiving input on state priorities. And I've in the past sent letters, the transportation chairs, Senator Bell and Assemblymember Frazier have sent letters. I think it is appropriate if the commission as well, while not statutorily listed, I think the UCs would welcome input.
Awesome.
So if the TAC or the CTC ever wanted to send a letter to the chair of the UC ITS or Minetta, who's running the CSU research program for the many campuses, that would certainly be an avenue as well to go on the record with some priorities.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
And-
That's awesome.
And Chair, I just want to also mention, recognize we have Laura Podolsky, who's from UC, who kind of handles the SB1 funding programs. So,
Awesome. That's
we just
great.
wanted to close that loop on that.
Very good. All right. Shall we do one more item, and then is lunch coming in, or what are we going to do there? We'll let,
Why don't we?
well, 11:45, okay. Well, we're here in a couple of minutes here. So how about, shall we do one more item then on the agenda, and then we can take a break for lunch? So that would be Stephen and Carrie to provide an update on the research, perfectly timed.
So before I hand it off to Carrie to give the meat of the presentation, I want to make it perfectly clear. I am the technical officer that's appointed to MBUFA and also to the Ruck West, and I am, in fact, next week I'm going to go participate with Ruck West in their quarterly meeting. But it's been Brady and Carrie who have been doing the lion's share of the work, and I cannot say enough about how much they've been interacting with other folks outside of the state and within the state. You heard on the phone, Mr. Buckley said, it's been great working with Carrie and with Brady. He didn't mention me because I don't think I've actually met him. So I have a very peripheral role in this, and it's really been Carrie and Brady who have been carrying all the water. And before Carrie gets started, I just want to thank her and Brady also for all the work that they've done in this program.
Thank you, Stephen. That's great.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning. It's still morning. Chair Dunn, all your committee members, it's been a really long time since I've been here, but it is so nice to see all your smiling faces. I'm going to just kind of provide you with a brief overview of where we've been and where we're headed, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of questions based on our conversation that we've had already today. So just to kind of set the table, as you recall, in December of 2017, we released our final report. California State Transportation Agency, CalSTA, was the author of that report. It was sent out to the policy and fiscal committees of the legislature. It was sent to all of you, the commission, our transportation stakeholders and partners, as well as our participants in the pilot. It had a plethora of information on how we conducted our pilot, the results of our pilot, and really was a very nice culmination of all the work that we did. Our final report, the whole thing, appendix and all, with the big evaluation report, is on our website if you want to really bore yourself for a little bit, or if you haven't seen it in a while. If you do need extra copies, we certainly have some in our office. Are happy to send out to you. Just let me know and I'll get them to Jen and she can send them out to you. So that's where we were. Here's where we're headed. So, and in 2015, the feds passed, or the legislature, Congress passed, the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, the FAST Act. And within that act was a section for Surface Transportation System Funding Alternatives. It's a mouthful. So it is a grant program that was within the overall FAST Act 5-year allocation, or however you call it, the act, the Transportation Act. But it was had $95 million over a 5-year period. The first year was for $15 million, and that was strictly for transportation planning, doing the planning activities leading up to years 2 through 5, which are strictly for demonstration purposes. So California was a recipient of round 1, 2, and 3. So we had planning funds, and we have 2 years of actual demonstration funds. The sync up between the federal fiscal year and the state fiscal year is kind of wonky, so a lot of things got delayed. We have completed year 1 of our grant work, but years 2 and 3 we haven't even started on, so I will get more into that. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to point out. So first year was 15 million, 20 million every year after that. Interesting thing is year 1, there was a subscription to the grant program at about a little over 14 million. So pretty close to the max. Year 2 was 20 million, and it was 15 million was awarded. So we're seeing a little bit of a downtrend. And then finally this last year, a 20 million ask, and we barely reached $10 million that was awarded. And that was not because there were not grants that were worthy of an award. It was the fact that there was undersubscription. And a lot of that has to do with needing to be a demonstration, and probably more importantly, B, is a requirement of a 50% match of state funds. So you can't match it with other federal funds. It has to be state funds or state in-kind services or, personnel hours. So it's a pretty tough lift for some of your smaller, more, not as having those additional resources to be able to do that match. So, the first year, as I mentioned, was planning activities. And as the TAC had recommended, and, as you heard from Mr. Medaffer, I want to call him Chair Medaffer or Commissioner Medaffer, but Jim, the fact that, just Jim, one of the items was paying at the pump. We needed to explore whether or not pay at the pump was a viable option. During the TAC phase, that was something that we discussed as being could we do test pay at the pump at the time. we kind of went off to the wayside for a number of reasons, but really it came down to we had a very truncated period of time to run our pilot. And so it was not going to be feasible for us to find a technology, do the system operations and be able to develop a system to be able to test and demonstrate pay at the pump. But we thought that there was value behind it, especially after we completed our pilot, the feedback that we received, the complexities of enforcement and compliance, where pay at the pump had some legwork. So what we did in this planning phase was look at how do we start collecting the information from, I should probably go to the next slide. Taking the information from the vehicle into the pump, into the state account manager and the state. This is a very simplified look at how we put together the concept of operations and to see whether there was feasibility out there. Technology had advanced enough from, back when Oregon did it in 2006. It was determined that, in fact, yes, there had been technology advancements enough. So what we did was we issued it an RFI to see if there were vendors or technology or startups that had some idea of how could we do this particular pilot or demonstration. We got a nice response. We did find some technologies that work to some degree, so they have an element of it, but they don't have the full package to be able to do them by themselves, this whole type of demonstration. So we've identified, yes, we're probably going, when we're doing the demonstration, it's probably going to have to be a consortium of companies to be able to provide these services. So really, at the end of the day, we're going to move forward with our demonstration that we found that it was feasible. We know that we're going to have a multitude of technology providers, and we are put together a demonstration plan. So we have an idea, how are we going to pursue this and actually do the demonstration. We're looking at trying to contain it geographically, so it's not, maybe in Sacramento, maybe somewhere else. It could be state fleets that are part of it to just start that research. So we do have an element of where we're looking at state fleets for this service. We're not only doing pay at the pump, but we're also looking at charging stations. So technologies that can do both aspects. So that's will be our next demonstration, which I'll get in later. Another part of the phase one or year one of the grant was looking at organizational design. As you remember, our pilot, we did some kind of a very high level 30,000 look at organizational design, put together a straw man. Here are our partners, had meetings with some of the partners, other state departments that might be impacted, and had the opportunity to leverage those conversations. And we continued to have further conversations during this planning stage, really focusing on, what agency could do it. And for purposes of our research, we identified DMV as probably the most logical department to do this type of work because they have that interface with vehicle owners, they have the VINs, they have the collections process, they have an enforcement and compliance process. So DMV was the best fit for that particular work. Out of these conversations with our partners, there was a common theme. We need to keep it simple. We need to have a very robust communications effort to make sure that our participants are aware and how it all works. I think the clear and keeping it simple aspect of it is making sure that there is no barrier for compliance. Also, we didn't want to reinvent an organization, and that's kind of where we went with a DMV. Moving forward, it's really going to be up to the legislature on where they want to place an organization like this. It would be ideal to be able to, leverage whatever resources that we have. But there will be impacts. There are going to have to be staffing increases and divisions within DMV to be created to be able to manage and operate a program like this. One of the other big things that we did was some public attitude research. Initially, when we put our grant in, we had, and this was back in 2016, so that was a long time ago, it was our concept was, let's do something a little robust in our communication strategy. Let's do something that's very public-facing and be able to talk about how is transportation funded? Why are we in the situation that we're in? And then start the conversation of alternatives, road charge being one of them. Because of the political climate, by the time we started doing the work, it was determined it probably better if we took a little bit of a more cautious approach. So we did some polling and surveys, leveraging the work that we'd already done during the TAC phase and our pilot phase on the polling. So you can see some of the results. This is from the surveys. We did 1,300 surveys, 1,000 in English and 300 in Spanish, really trying to get the pulse of where people were. Obviously, they wanted to know more about road conditions and funding stability. This was all going on at the same time the SB1 and Prop 6 was going on, so there was a lot more knowledge and interest in the subject. They wanted to know how would a road charge work? How is it going, is it going to be somebody's tracking me, or is it more of a manual system or self-reporting? And then follow and tell me more. Tell me more. How is this going to impact me? When is it going to happen? How is it, the fairness aspect of it? And I mean, one of the really key research findings out of this was, there is a lot of education that needs to be going on around not just road charge, but transportation in general. We also did polling, focus groups. So we did a number of focus groups, 6 in English, 1 in Spanish, all throughout the state, same time frame as when we were doing our polling. It certainly was an interesting conversation. There are concerns about the gas tax and what was happening with the gas tax. There was a lot of side conversations, and they were very interesting. It's certainly, the fairness aspect was probably one of the things that really resonated is once we explained what a road charge is and you're paying for your usage instead of paying by the commodity, and that electric vehicles, Jim's not paying his fair share, that was really what really tipped the scales. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we need to do more. Our messaging really needs to be around creating a stable, sustainable transportation network as well as a funding approach. So that is kind of what we did with round 1 of our FAST Act grant work. So now on to the fun stuff. It's the demonstration phase. So as I mentioned, we had not done anything with round 2 and 3. A lot of, timing issues were a big deal. And we actually just found out in February about round 3, being awarded for round 3. So to be efficient, we decided let's do a demonstration that's multi-phased. So we're combining the pay at the pump aspect and what we had proposed in round 3 of our grant. So what we're looking at in this multi-phased is the pay at the pump demonstration. We've got user-based insurance, transportation network companies, TNCs, or your Ubers and your Lyfts, and autonomous vehicles. I've already talked to you about what pay at the pump is. The user-based insurance is more of looking at these companies to provide commercial account manager-like services. They're already having the device in the vehicle. Hopefully, we can move away from a device that's recording information. Is there a way that we can link our need for pulling mileage information and transmitting it to whoever is going to be collecting on those revenues? So leveraging whether or not we can use user-based insurance companies as a conduit for moving road charge along. With the TNCs, as mentioned, TNCs already have systems in their vehicles. They ride hailing, you've got an Uber, they know where they're picking you up and where they're dropping you off. We don't want to know that, but we want to know what were those miles, and being able to work within those TNCs, not only to be a commercial account manager, but could potentially help us in understanding how we collect the data and make sure it's secure, transmit the data, and be able to collect the revenues. And then finally, the AVs. Because California is in that, we have that technology, we have 2 testing grounds in California. Is there a way of working with those testing facilities to run vehicles? I mean, it might be a very short, limited pilot, but be able to run the vehicles on their test track and find out whether or not there is the data, what they're pulling, the information that they're pulling out of the vehicles, the systems that they have in their vehicles are capable of transmitting that data. I mean, it all comes down to that data, and that's what we need. So that's why we're looking at AVs as a potential, a way of moving forward, and possibly using AVs as your jumping off point for transitioning from a gas tax to a road charge using AVs. We'll also be doing evaluation of all the technologies and the phases and demonstrations. Some of them might not work, some might work. We're hopeful that we'll have some success at some level for all of them. But learning from the TAC phase and having an independent evaluation was very critical for, I think, the success and the credibility of our pilot. So having that independent evaluation moving forward is important to the department. So as mentioned, there was some additional research that we're doing. I know Stephen will talk about the Division of Research, Innovation, System Information, DRI-SI, or I like to call them DRISI. They are helping us out with some of our research that we're doing. The disadvantaged communities part of, we recognize that was an area that needed additional studying. So we partnered with the Foundation of California Community Colleges as a way of looking at or starting the conversation and doing some initial research in that realm, understanding that the TAC and the commission had made this recommendation. We wanted to start looking at how could we move this conversation forward. So we partnered with FCCC. They have, I think you should have an abstract or some one-pager within your book there that talks about what we're looking at. The community colleges are placed in areas of disadvantaged communities. They have a pretty robust program in place. They're working a lot with ARB in doing their disadvantaged community work, so we thought it was a good partnership. They'll be producing white papers. As soon as we have some initial research information from them, we will bring it back to you. We probably anticipate coming back at the next TAC meeting to be able to provide you with an update of what they're doing. I did talk to Professor Wax before the meeting, and I think there is a lot of synergy where we could put UCLA or the UCs together with FCC to be able to continue on with some more robust research. Do you have a question, Susan? Sorry.
I do not, except that I think I just want to do a time check just because I know we're at lunch. So Weren't sure how many slides you have.
I have like 25. No,
Do
I
you
don't.
really?
I only have 3.
Thank you, Carrie.
Okay,
Thanks.
no worries.
What I thought I'd do, Carrie, is have you finish up your presentation, then we'll take a break for lunch, and everybody will then think of 5,000
Oh,
questions
no,
to
no, no,
torture
no,
you.
no.
And
I
then
thought
have
the
you come
questions,
back.
I mean, oh, no,
No. Then we'll have you come back
right,
and
all
answer
right.
questions after
All
they
right,
have
then I
their
won't
lunch in
get
front
into
of
too
them.
much depth then.
Okay.
A lot of our DRISI work or dry SI work is in the emerging technology aspect of it, as well as the financial analysis part of it. We're doing some kind of white papers just on user-based insurance, the autonomous vehicle, the TNCs, to inform our work or our scope of work for our proposal on the 3 demonstrations. The advanced road charge modeling is something that we are working on for next year. And what that really is looking at is understanding the VMT impacts of TNCs and AVs and the pooled role of pooled services. So it's kind of got a broader look than just on road charge. And then on the financial analysis, there's a lot of information on excise tax, but at least in my group, we didn't understand really how does it work? Where is it collected? Where does it go? Does it go to, the IRS, and then does it go to the Treasury? And so we're putting together a little study and a fact sheet, so it's something easy to hand out. And we can explain the state gas tax, but the federal is maybe a little bit of a mystery. Maybe for me, Stephen probably knows what it's all about. And then we have a study which I think is pretty interesting, the intersection of the EV, battery electric vehicles, and internal combustion engine vehicle cost savings. And really it is finding that tipping point of I'm going to buy a Tesla. So when do we meet where an electric vehicle and an ICE vehicle, so is it 5 years? Do I recover my cost, or is it 3 years, or whatever it is? So we thought that would be an interesting little study and be able to have some graphic, some way of explaining, and still encouraging people to pursue getting electric vehicles. So that's what we're doing. I did fail to say that, we are just finalizing procurement for our demonstrations. We are hoping to have a contract in place by the end of the fiscal year and starting work immediately. So Anthony talked about what we're doing as far as Ruck West. Just to kind of show we're not out there alone. There are more and more states starting to participate, getting grant funds or starting their own little studies, have an interest, might be monitoring, but there is a lot more interest. We're not out here alone on the West Coast looking at road charge. The fact that there is a national pilot discussion is very encouraging, albeit a little bit frightening, having been part of those conversations. So, and that's me. But I just have one thing that I want to say. I know that we're going to talk about it, or you're going to talk about it on agenda item 13 about what can the TAC do. I have a huge ask, maybe, is communicate. That's what we need. When we put out our final report, it was at a time that maybe we didn't want to talk too much about what we're doing in road charge. And so there wasn't a lot of hubbub about, ooh, look at what California did and did this great study and the results. I think that would probably be the best thing that you could do for our program, is to go and talk to our policymakers, go talk to your stakeholders, your community leaders, because that's what's missing right now. And we need that champion side of it. And the one thing that I want to caution is to do pilot's sake. We have to move the ball. I mean, that was something that we could try to talk to them, and BUFA and Ruck West, is we can't keep studying the same thing, and that's what we seem to be doing, is studying the same thing over and over again, and that's not going to progress the conversation, and my fear is that's what's going to happen at the federal level.
Thank you, Carrie. Do
You're
not
welcome.
go far, but people's attention, I know, will be revitalized when they get a little fuel in them themselves. And so, thank you all very, very much for that presentation, and then we'll all be back at you with questions and thoughts. And why don't we take a little bit of a break, maybe 15 minutes or so, grab some lunch, do some comfort, and check your smartphones, and I'll call us back at about 25 after or so.